The biting cold of the Montana winter dug its fangs into Thea Bennett's skin as she slumped against the trunk of a barren oak, her tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. The year was 1878, and she had nothing but the thin cotton dress that barely covered her shivering body and the cruel memory of the men who had taken everything else from her. The stagecoach robbery had been swift and merciless. The other passengers, wealthy merchants and a banker's wife, had valuables to surrender. Thea had only the small bundle containing all her worldly possessions: her mother's locket, a change of clothes, and the $30 she'd saved for a new start in Helena. When the bandits discovered how little she had, they'd grown angry, as if her poverty was a personal affront. They'd thrown her from the coach and tossed her bundle into a ravine before continuing their journey with the remaining terrified passengers. Now, as the snow began to fall more heavily, Thea knew she wouldn't survive the night. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and a dangerous drowsiness was settling over her. She thought of her parents, both gone now, and wondered if she might soon join them. Perhaps that wouldn't be so terrible. The sound came so faintly at first that Thea believed it to be a hallucination, the rhythmic crunch of hooves on snow. She forced her eyes open, blinking away the frost that had gathered on her lashes. Through the curtain of white, a dark silhouette emerged, growing larger as it approached. A horse and rider materialized from the blizzard like an apparition. The horse, a sturdy palomino, snorted clouds of vapor into the frigid air. Its rider, tall and broad-shouldered, dismounted in one fluid motion. "Good Lord, what are you doing out here?" The man's voice was deep with a slight drawl, his face partially obscured by a thick scarf and the wide brim of his hat. Thea tried to answer, but her lips were too numb to form words. The stranger knelt beside her, removing his gloves to press warm fingers against her wrist, checking for a pulse. "You're half frozen," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his heavy buffalo coat and wrapped it around her trembling form. The sudden warmth was so intense it was almost painful against her frozen skin. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Can you stand?" When Thea couldn't respond, the man gently lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. He settled her onto his horse before mounting behind her, one strong arm holding her securely against his chest. "I'm Wade Daniels," he said close to her ear as he urged the horse forward. "And I reckon today's your lucky day, madam, because I don't usually ride this trail." Thea wanted to thank him, to tell him her name, but consciousness was slipping away from her, darkness closing in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the steady beat of the man's heart against her back and the comforting scent of leather and pine that clung to his coat. When Thea awoke, she was lying on a narrow bed in a small, rustic cabin. A fire roared in the stone hearth, filling the single room with golden light and blessed warmth. She was dressed in clothing that was not her own, a man's flannel shirt that hung to her knees and thick woolen socks. "You're awake!" The voice startled her. She turned to see the man Wade sitting in a chair by the fire, whittling a piece of wood. In the firelight, she could finally see him clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Where am I?" Her voice emerged as a rasp. "My cabin," Wade replied, setting aside his carving, "about 10 miles northeast of Cowlson." He stood and moved to the stove where a pot simmered. "Hope you don't mind about the clothes. Yours were soaked through. I closed my eyes while I changed you." A slight flush colored his tan cheeks. "Thank you," Thea whispered, clutching the blanket to her chest, "for saving my life." Wade shrugged as if rescuing half-dead women from snowstorms was an everyday occurrence. Anyone would have done the same. He ladled steaming stew into a bowl. "Think you can eat?" The rich aroma of the food reminded Thea that she hadn't eaten in over a day. She nodded eagerly, pushing herself to a sitting position despite the protest of her stiff limbs. Wade brought the bowl to her, along with a chunk of crusty bread. "Go slow. Your body's been through a lot." Thea took a spoonful of the stew venison with wild onions and potatoes. It was simple but delicious, and she had to resist the urge to gulp it down. "I'm Thea Bennett," she offered between bites. "I was on the stagecoach to Helena when we were robbed. They took everything I had and left me behind." Wade's expression hardened. "The Blackwater gang, most likely. They've been terrorizing these parts for months." He ran a hand through his dark hair. "The law can't seem to catch up to them." "I had so little for them to take," Thea said bitterly. "Just my mother's locket and enough money to maybe start over." "Start over from what?" Thea hesitated, not accustomed to sharing her troubles with strangers, but this man had saved her life, and something in his steady gaze encouraged trust. "My parents died last spring influenza. The farm was mortgaged to the bank. When they foreclosed, I had nowhere to go." She took another spoonful of stew. "My mother had a friend in Helena who owns a dressmaking shop. She wrote that I could work for her, maybe learn the trade." Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Hard times make for hard choices. What about you?" Thea asked, suddenly curious about her rescuer. "Do you live here alone?" "Just me and Thunder, that's my horse," Wade confirmed. "Been that way for 3 years now. I raise some cattle on the north pasture, hunt, trap a bit in winter. It's a quiet life." "It sounds peaceful." Wade's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Most days. Some days it's just lonely." He stood abruptly, as if embarrassed by the admission. "You should rest. When the storm passes, I'll take you into town. The sheriff can help you get to Helena." Thea felt a strange pang of disappointment at the thought of leaving, which made no sense. She barely knew this man. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "No need," Wade said, his voice gruff. "Just get some sleep." But sleep proved elusive for Thea that night, despite her exhaustion. She lay awake, listening to the wind howl outside and the occasional creak of the chair where Wade sat keeping watch, his silhouette outlined against the dying fire. The blizzard continued for 3 days, trapping Thea and Wade in the small cabin. At first, Thea was nervous about the forced proximity, but Wade proved to be respectful and kind. He gave her space when she needed it, surrendering his bed and sleeping on a bedroll near the fire. During the day, they fell into a comfortable routine. Wade taught Thea to play checkers with a set he'd carved himself. She helped with meals, discovering she enjoyed cooking with the simple ingredients he had on hand. In the evenings, he read aloud from one of the few books he owned, mostly adventure tales and a well-worn Bible. On the third afternoon, as they sat shelling dried beans at the rough-hewn table, Thea worked up the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her. "Why do you live so far from town? Most ranchers at least have hands or family nearby." Wade's fingers stilled on the beans. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "I was married once," he said finally, his voice low. "Emily. We came out here from Pennsylvania, full of dreams about building a cattle empire." A sad smile crossed his face. "She died in childbirth our 2nd year here, the baby too. By then, I couldn't bear to live around people and their pitying looks. So I sold most of the herd, kept just enough to get by, and stayed put." "I'm sorry," Thea said softly, resisting the urge to place her hand over his. "Life deals the cards it deals," Wade replied with a shrug that didn't quite hide his pain. "We just play the hand we're given." That evening, as the wind finally began to die down, Wade announced that they'd likely be able to make the journey to town the next day. Thea acknowledged this with a nod, ignoring the heaviness that settled in her chest at the thought. Morning brought clear skies and a world transformed into a pristine white landscape. Wade lent Thea a pair of his trousers, which she belted tightly and rolled at the ankles, along with his spare coat. Her dress, though dry, was too thin for the journey. "It's not exactly fashionable," Wade said with a hint of amusement as he helped her onto Thunder. "I think I've given up on fashion in favor of not freezing to death," Thea replied, earning a rare laugh from him. The ride to Cowlson took nearly 3 hours. Thea sat in front of Wade, his arms around her as he held the reins. Despite the cold, She was aware of the warmth of his body behind hers, the security she felt in his presence. Cowson was little more than a wide spot in the road, a handful of buildings huddled together as if for warmth. The general store, saloon, and sheriff's office made up the main street, with a few small houses and a church dotting the surrounding area. Their arrival drew curious stares from the few people braving the cold. Wade helped Thea dismount in front of the sheriff's office, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. "Sheriff Taylor's a good man," Wade said. "He'll help you get where you need to go." Thea nodded, suddenly unable to find words. After all they'd shared in those 3 days, this goodbye felt strangely inadequate. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels, for everything." Wade touched the brim of his hat. "Take care of yourself, Miss Bennett." He was turning to leave when the sheriff's office door opened. A burly man with a silver star pinned to his coat stepped out, his eyebrows rising at the sight of them. "Wade Daniels, haven't seen you in town for months." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Thea. "And who might this be?" Wade explained Thea's situation while she stood quietly beside him, suddenly aware of her strange attire and what their arrival together might look like to others. The sheriff's expression grew serious when Wade mentioned the stagecoach robbery. "That's the 3rd one this month. Those Blackwater boys are getting bolder." He turned to Thea. "I'm sorry for your trouble, miss. The next stage to Helena doesn't leave until the end of the week, but Mrs. Powell at the boarding house will put you up." "She has no money," Wade pointed out. "The robbers took everything." Sheriff Taylor sighed. "I wish I could help, but the town's coffers are nearly empty after that flood in the fall." Thea felt her heart sink. She had nowhere to go, no means to get to Helena, and no way to pay for food or shelter. "She can stay with me," Wade said suddenly. "Until we figure something out." Both Thea and the sheriff looked at him in surprise. "That's mighty generous," the sheriff said carefully, "but are you sure that's proper?" "A single woman staying with, she can help around the ranch," Wade interrupted, a flush creeping up his neck. "I've been meaning to fix up the old cabin for a hired hand anyway. She can stay there." Thea was torn between gratitude for his offer and embarrassment at being discussed as if she weren't present. "Mr. Daniels, I couldn't impose, it's no imposition," Wade insisted. "And it's just until you can get to Helena." The sheriff scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Well, Wade's a good man, miss. His place is rough, but you'd be safe there." He glanced between them. "Still, folks might talk." "Let them," Wade said with unexpected firmness. "Miss Bennett needs help and I'm offering it. Nothing improper about that." And so it was decided. After purchasing a few supplies with money Wade insisted was just a loan, they returned to the ranch. Wade showed Thea to the second cabin, a small, dusty structure that had clearly been unused for years. "It needs work," he admitted, surveying the cobwebs and the sagging bed. "But the roof's sound. We can clean it up together." Thea was overwhelmed by his generosity. "Why are you doing this for me? You don't even know me." Wade was quiet for a moment, looking around the abandoned cabin with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Maybe I've been alone too long," he finally said. "Or maybe I just know what it's like to have everything taken from you." He met her gaze directly. "Everyone deserves a chance to start over, Thea." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the way it sounded in his deep voice made her heart flutter strangely. Over the next weeks, Thea and Wade fell into a rhythm of work and companionship. They cleaned the small cabin together, repaired its broken window, and made it habitable. Thea insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and mending Wade's clothes, which were in desperate need of attention. Wade taught Thea about ranch life, how to milk the 2 cows he kept, gather eggs from the henhouse, and even ride Thunder, who proved to be a patient teacher. In the evenings, they often sat by the fire in the main cabin, talking or reading companionably. Thea learned that Wade was well educated, the son of a Philadelphia merchant who had scandalized his family by heading west instead of joining the family business. He taught himself ranching through trial and error, books, and the occasional advice from neighboring ranchers. In turn, Thea shared stories of her childhood in Ohio, her father's small farm, and her mother's talent for creating beautiful dresses that the local women coveted. She spoke of her dreams of someday having her own dress shop, a goal that now seemed impossibly distant. "You could still do it," Wade said one evening as they sat shelling peas. "Helena's not going anywhere. You could save up, learn more about ranching while you're here. It's useful knowledge no matter where you end up." Thea had stopped thinking about leaving, she realized with a start. The idea of returning to her original plan felt strange now, as if it belonged to a different person. As winter began to loosen its grip, and the first hints of spring appeared, Thea noticed subtle changes in Wade. He smiled more often. He'd taken to shaving regularly and had trimmed his hair. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his eyes quickly darting away when she turned. One mild afternoon in early April, Wade announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. Thea, busy with bread dough, nodded absently. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, lingering in the doorway. Thea thought for a moment. "Some thread would be nice, blue if they have it." Wade nodded, still not leaving. "Thea," he began, then paused as if gathering courage. "The spring dance is next Saturday in town. I thought perhaps we might attend, together." Thea's hands stilled in the dough. The spring dance was a courting event. Everyone in the county would know what it meant if they went together. "Are you asking to court me, Wade Daniels?" The question came out more boldly than she'd intended. Wade's ears reddened, but he held her gaze steadily. "I reckon I am, if you're amenable." Thea felt warmth spreading through her chest. Over the past months, her feelings for Wade had grown from gratitude into something deeper, something she'd been afraid to name. "I'm amenable," she said softly. Wade's face broke into a rare, full smile that transformed his features. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, took her flower-covered hand in his, and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised. And then he was gone, leaving Thea staring after him with her heart racing. Wade returned that evening with not only the requested thread, but also a length of calico fabric in a pretty blue that matched Thea's eyes. "For a new dress," he explained somewhat awkwardly. "For the dance, if you want it." Thea was touched beyond words. She spent the next week working on the dress whenever Wade was out tending the cattle or repairing fences. She used her mother's teachings to create something simple but flattering, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that swished pleasingly when she moved. On the evening of the dance, Thea felt a flutter of nerves as she dressed in her new creation. She had no mirror, but she'd arranged her honey-brown hair as best she could, pinning it up with combs Wade had brought from town. When she emerged from her cabin, Wade was waiting outside, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said with such genuine admiration that Thea blushed. "You clean up rather nicely yourself," she replied, noting how handsome he looked with his dark hair combed neatly. The dance was held in the newly constructed barn of the Hansons, the largest ranch in the county. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the hay-strewn floor. A small band played lively tunes, and tables laden with food and drink lined one wall. Their arrival together caused a stir. Wade hadn't attended a social function in years, and Thea was unknown to most. The women eyed her with curiosity, the men with appreciation that made Wade's jaw tighten possessively. "Don't mind them," Wade murmured, guiding her into the barn with a hand at the small of her back. "They're just not used to seeing such a pretty face." Thea was introduced to what felt like the entire county. Everyone was polite, if curious, and she found herself enjoying the community she hadn't known existed so close to their isolated ranch. When the fiddles struck up a waltz, Wade held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Bennett?" Thea placed her hand in his. "I'm not very practiced," she warned. "Neither am I," Wade admitted as he led her to the dance floor, "but I reckon we can figure it out together." His hand was warm at her waist, and despite their lack of practice, they moved well together. Wade was a natural leader, guiding her smoothly around the floor. People are staring, Thea whispered, aware of the eyes following them. Let them, Wade replied, his gaze never leaving her face. I'm too busy looking at you to notice. As the evening progressed, Thea danced with several other men, all of whom seemed eager to know more about Wade's girl. The possessive description made her cheeks warm with pleasure. During a break in the dancing, Wade brought her a cup of punch and led her outside. The spring night was cool but pleasant, the sky ablaze with stars. Are you enjoying yourself? He asked as they strolled away from the noise of the barn. Very much, Thea replied honestly. Everyone has been welcoming. Wade stopped walking and turned to face her. They can see what I see, he said softly. How special you are. Thea's heart quickened. And what do you see, Wade? In the silvery moonlight, his expression was earnest and vulnerable. I see a woman who's brave and kind and stronger than she knows. A woman who makes me laugh and think and feel alive again. He took her hands in his. A woman I've fallen in love with. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Thea felt tears prick her eyes. I never expected this, she whispered. When you found me in that snowstorm, I had nothing, not even hope. And now, Wade's voice was husky with emotion, now I have everything, Thea said simply, because I have you. Wade's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away a tear. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers in a tender kiss that sent warmth cascading through her entire body. When they returned to the dance, hand in hand, Thea noticed the approving glances and knowing smiles. They belonged together, everyone could see it. As spring blossomed into summer, Thea and Wade's relationship deepened. They worked side by side on the ranch, turning it from a place of mere survival into a true home. Wade seemed to stand taller now, to laugh more freely. Thea flourished under his steady affection, growing confident in her new skills and secure in their shared future. The letter from Helena arrived in July, a response to one Thea had sent explaining her changed circumstances. Mrs. Powell, her mother's friend, expressed her relief that Thea was safe and her joy at the happiness she'd found. The dressmaking position was filled, she wrote, but Thea was welcome to visit anytime. Thea showed the letter to Wade that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. Do you ever regret not going to Helena? He asked after reading it. Thea shook her head. Not for a moment. This is where I'm meant to be. Wade took her hand, his expression serious. I've been thinking about that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I carved this for you. Thea opened it to find a ring inside a simple gold band with a small pearl. Wade, I love you, Thea Bennett, Wade said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. I want to build a life with you, a family. I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up to your smile every morning. He took a deep breath. Will you marry me? Tears of happiness spilled down Thea's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Wade Daniels, I will marry you. Wade slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. They were married in the small church in Cowson on a perfect September day. The entire community turned out for the occasion, the church overflowing with people who had witnessed their courtship and embraced them as their own. Thea wore a dress she'd made herself, simple but elegant, with lace she'd ordered specially from St. Louis. Wade, standing at the altar in a new suit, looked at her as she walked down the aisle with such naked adoration that several of the older women dabbed at their eyes. Sheriff Taylor, who had become a good friend, gave Thea away. Mrs. Hanson, who had taken Thea under her wing, arranged flowers from her garden for the church and the small reception that followed at the ranch. That evening, as Wade carried her across the threshold of the main cabin, now their shared home, Thea reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the desperate young woman left to die in the snow to a rancher's wife, loved and respected by her community. What are you thinking about, Mrs. Daniels? Wade asked, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," Thea replied, reaching up to touch his beloved face. "If I hadn't been robbed and abandoned, I never would have found you." "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow," Wade said, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Some things are meant to be." As the years passed, the Daniels ranch prospered. Wade's careful management and Thea's practical input turned the modest operation into one of the most successful in the county. They added more cattle, hired hands to help with the expanding workload, and built a larger home to accommodate their growing family. Their first child, a son they named Thomas after Thea's father, arrived a year after their wedding. A daughter, Emma, named for both Wade's late wife and Thea's mother, followed 2 years later. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, growing strong and spirited under their parents' loving guidance. Thea never did open that dress shop, but she discovered a talent for designing practical yet attractive clothing for the hard-working women of Montana Territory. What began as favors for neighbors evolved into a small business operated from a sunny room in their home. Local women came from miles around to commission Thea's creations, which combined durability with unexpected touches of beauty. Wade watched his wife's enterprise grow with pride, building her a special cutting table and ordering fabrics and notions whenever he made the journey to bigger towns. He marveled at how she balanced motherhood, ranch work, and her sewing, all while keeping their home warm and welcoming. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wade surprised Thea with a trip back to the spot where he'd found her that snowy day. The oak tree still stood, now part of their expanded property. "I thought you might like to plant something here," Wade said, presenting her with a sapling of flowering cherry tree. "Something beautiful to mark where our story began." Thea was moved beyond words. Together they planted the tree, their children helping to pat down the soil around its tender roots. "Will it grow big, Papa?" 5-year-old Emma asked, her small hand in his. "With love and care it will," Wade assured her, his eyes meeting Thea's over their daughter's head. That evening, with the children asleep, Thea and Wade sat on the porch of their home, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Are you happy, my love?" Wade asked, the question as genuine as it had been when he'd first asked it years ago. Thea leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "You wrapped me in your coat that day, but you gave me so much more: a home, a family, a purpose." She looked up at him, her eyes shining with love. "You gave me a new life, Wade Daniels, and it's more beautiful than anything I could have dreamed." Wade's kiss was as tender as their first, filled with the depth of feeling that had only grown stronger with time. As the Montana night wrapped around them like a familiar blanket, Thea knew that, while the journey hadn't always been easy, every step had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who had found her in the snow and given her not just his coat, but his heart.